All right, we are back talking about MLP Friendship is Magic. Now, Halloween just wrapped up, and with the holiday season around the corner, I decided to do a ranking of all the holiday themed episodes of Friendship is Magic. Now, obviously, in Friendship is Magic, there are three main holidays with real world parallels, those being Hearts and Hooves Day, Nightmare Night, and Hearthwarming Eve. So, for this list, I'll only be looking at episodes that are centered around those holidays. Now, I know there's some ambiguity on this subject, with some episodes meant to fit the mood of those holidays, such as Winter Wrap Up or 28 Pranks Later, but I decided to keep this list narrow and only focus on episodes that are explicitly about these holidays. I also decided to include Best Gift Ever on this list, as while it technically isn't an episode, it is a holiday special within the mainline series. With that out of the way, there are 9 episodes to rank. We have 5 Hearts Warming Eve episodes, 2 Nightmare Night episodes, and 2 Hearts and Who's episodes. So with that, let's jump right in. So starting off the list at number 9, we have the worst of these holiday episodes, and for me, this was pretty easy. We have the Breakup Breakdown from season 8. This isn't the only episode focusing on Big Mac and Sugar Bell's relationship, but it's the only one that actually happens during Hearts and Hooves Day, so for this list it counts. And this episode is such a drag to watch. The entire conflict of the episode comes from a misunderstanding. And the setup is so blatant where Big Mac is eavesdropping on Sugar Bell and Mrs. Cake, and all Sugar Bell had to say was, "How do I tell him that I'm moving to Ponyville?" How hard was that to say, especially when speaking to a pony that's in on the plan? But instead, she has to be cryptic, almost as if she knew Big Mac was in the room and didn't want to spoil the surprise. It's so obvious that the episode needed a misunderstanding that Sugar Bell had to clunkily phrase it as if she were breaking up with him. And it just so happens that Big Mac only heard that part of the conversation and nothing before, nothing after. Some grade A writing right there. But knowing the actual news makes this episode harder to watch. You know that this conflict could have been avoided so easily. This is also an episode with the Big Mac Spike Discord trio. And personally, I've never been a huge fan of this grouping, particularly Discord. I don't mind them in episodes that don't deal with Big Mac's love life, but in this episode, as well as the Big Mac question, the dynamic usually involves Discord giving terrible advice and making everything worse. I mean, Discord trying to hook him up with a cardboard skeleton was a little cute, but I didn't find much of this content very funny. But ultimately, Discord is the one to make things worse by convincing Big Mac that he should beat Sugar Bell to the punch by dumping her before she can dump him. And then there's the scene where Big Mac dumps Sugar Bell, which, while having some merit, suffers from the whole misunderstanding stuff. Mrs. Cake acknowledges the fact that Sugar Bell's script sounds too cryptic, but the cat was already out of the bag by that point. And there were multiple opportunities where Big Mac was speaking for Big Sugar Bell to say she's moving to Ponyville. But between her being shell shocked and Big Mac being like, "Nope, I'm the one talking. I won't let you say it. I will have the last word." This moment felt more frustrating than heartfelt. Oh yeah, speaking of misunderstandings, this episode also has a side plot of the CMC thinking that the pie Big Mac made for Sugar Bell was actually for Sweetie Belle. This side plot was alright, but didn't really do much for me. On the whole, I wasn't all that impressed with this episode. It's riddled with misunderstandings and forced conflicts that plague romance stories in general. And by the end, I just didn't care about anything that happened. I mean, yeah, it's cool that Sugar Bell and Big Mac got back together, but I just didn't care. And that's a big reason why this episode is as bad as it is. I mean, this conflict could have been avoided so easily. And it's that frustration that makes me not like this episode, and it's also what makes me consider it the worst of the holiday episodes. So I have it here at number 9. Now we're moving on to number 8, and believe it or not, we're already wrapping up with the Valentine's episodes, and we have Hearts and Hooves Day. And again, I think this sort of says a lot about how I feel about these two episodes, but obviously this episode wasn't that good. Now, I don't actually mind the episode as much as a lot of other people. Like, I know a lot of people just hate this episode, call it one of the worst of the early seasons of the show. And of course, I'll get into that, but obviously there's the pretty nasty part of the CMC drugging Big Mac and Shirley into loving each other, which has some less than pleasant parallels in the real world. But it's not the worst thing in the world, considering that one, the CMC realized relatively quickly that it was a mistake to do it in the first place, and two, they at least get punished for it at the end by sheerly forcing them to do all Big Mac's chores. I mean, so they're at least being held accountable for their actions. I know a lot of people also find Big Mac and Shirley's lovey-dovey talk annoying. I don't really care for it. I mean, it doesn't help the episode, but I kind of just tune it out. I mean, it's just is what it is. Aside from that, this episode is very unremarkable. While I don't flat hate it, I understand why most people don't like it, and I'm not too incentivized to defend it either. I mean, the song was okay, but nothing special. I got some ironic enjoyment from the way the two date scenes were set up, to where they're pretty much copy and pasted of cutting between Big Mac and Shirley, almost kind of flirting, and then cutting to the CMC in the bush smiling, and the zoom in and the fact that their faces are kind of frozen there. I mean, I did get some enjoyment from that, but really this episode was just kind of for me. I mean, while I would consider it a bottom half episode in the grand scheme of MLP, I don't particularly hate it. I just don't particularly care for it, and that's a big reason why I have it here at number 8. Now we're moving on to number 7, and now that we're done with the Hearts and Hooves episodes, that pretty much leaves the rest of the list as being either Heartwarming Eve episodes or Nightmare Night episodes. So, starting off at number 7, the weakest of that grouping of episodes, we have Heartwarming Eve, the original Christmas special of the show. And I consider it the weakest one. I mean, out of all of them, this one feels the least festive, in my opinion, despite it being about a play about the holiday's origins. Casting each of the main six to represent these historical figures was interesting, and it also allowed us to see parallels between these figures and the main characters. It was also a bit interesting to see how each of the characters' personality traits aligned with key shortcomings for the leaders they represent. Rarity's too haughty, Rainbow Dash is too prideful, and Pinky is too ditzy. In general, it was a decent world building episode as well, not only explaining Equestria's founding, but also establishing the Wendigos. Now, you could say that the Wendigo's existence kind of ruins the characters, as it suggests that the characters are only being nice to each other to ward off an existential threat. And I didn't love the joke at the end where the main six were fighting, only to stop when they heard a howling sound through the window. And really, as a whole, I mean, I didn't really care for the backstage squabbling early on the episode. I mean, I know that the whole point of it was to help the main six see the point of Hearthstone Eve, where they got so distracted by the production side of things that they failed to remember the content of the actual play they were putting on. But I could have done without it. But overall, the play itself was fine. Aside from that, the episode was just kind of all right. Like, I don't think there are too many game breaking flaws with it. Like, I can't really think of anything that I hate about it. But like and Hoops Day, like I just didn't really care much for it. I mean, it was just kind of there. I mean, and I feel like the episodes we'll be talking about soon do a lot more to really bring me into the holiday spirit, but also are just better episodes in their own right. So I have it here at number 7. Now we're moving on to number 6, and we're finally getting to the non episode of this list. And I did have a debate about putting it on the list, considering that it's not technically an episode, but it is a holiday episode. So I decided to put Best Gift Ever at number 6. So, and I actually have a confession to make about this one. So I actually watched this one, like, not when it first came out, but a little bit afterwards, but I just completely forgot about it. I forgot about it to the point where I had to, when putting this list together, like rewatched it, thinking that I was only seeing it for the first time and sort of jogging my memory. But then as I watched it and started to piece things together, I realized that I had already watched it and just completely forgot about it. And I think that kind of says a lot about the special as a whole. I mean, I guess along similar lines, I forgot to put it on my musical episode ranking, even though it has 2 songs and it technically counts. So I'd say for that list, like I guess if you care enough, that it would go right below Carolot Wedding, so around the number 8 spot on that list. But obviously here it's number 6. But again, like I think the fact that it took me rewatching it to even remember that I had watched it kind of says a lot about the special as a whole. I feel like it's very middle of the road. There are plenty of good moments from it, like Pinky's side plot, the gift givers of the Grove are interesting characters, Rarity's side plot with visiting the acorn farmer is good, and even Applejack and Fluttershy's side plot had its moments. But I don't know. Twilight's side plot didn't do much for me. Didn't care much for Rainbow Dash and Discord. I mean, Discord was just being Discord again, not really being helpful. And Spike's side plot, while it has its moments, isn't anything too special. I also didn't find the climax all that interesting either, where Flurry Heart and Discord once again screw everything up. Although in Discord's case, it was just another one of his quote unquote teaching moments. The songs are good. I mean, I like the first one at the beginning, but it's nothing too memorable. I think there's sort of wonky melodies going on in it. The second song is also alright, but again, nothing too special. And again, it's kind of interesting how I completely forgot watching it the first time. It's a shame because I think the special definitely tries to justify its length by having multiple side plots, trying to make it feel like this grand story. But at the end of the day, I feel like a lot of it just feels normal to me. I mean, you could have any one of these being a normal 22-minute episode. Well, maybe except for Pinky's side plot, but I could see any of these other ones sort of being their own episodes outside of this. So it's not too bad. It doesn't have any major holes in it, but I'm just kind of meh on it. So I have it here at number six. Now we're moving on to number five, and I feel like the rest of this list should be pretty interesting, at least from my perspective, because what I did was that I put an initial draft together of the episodes and how I would rank them. And then I rewatched some of them and I kind of put my thoughts down and they actually jumped around quite a bit. Like most of the movement and changes from my initial draft are in the top half of this list. So I think it's pretty interesting seeing how these episodes got jumbled around and mixed up since then. But at number five, I decided to put Hearthbreakers, the season five episode. Now, this is a pretty fun episode for the most part. Now, with regards to the message, I can see why people wouldn't like it. The message is trying to teach is you should try to learn more about other people's traditions first and not impose your own traditions onto them. With that said, a lot of the episode focuses on Applejack having to learn this lesson, while we don't see a ton of the Pie family learning about the apple traditions. I did some thinking about this as that is one of the major sore spots in this episode, and one of the reasons why I hesitate with putting it in higher regard. I mean, after all, a lot of my least favorite episodes are ones that try to send one message but convey another through poor writing. I also don't like it when episodes hold one person accountable for their missteps, but others are not, despite committing comparable actions. So, what about this one? Well, I do still hold it partially against the episode. After all, most of the episode is about Applejack not jiving with the pie traditions, only for her to learn that there's more than one way to celebrate the holiday. It's only at the end where we see the pie show any give towards the apples, but the reason I don't completely discredit this episode is because the apples are guests at the pies. And sure, if you're the host, you want to be gracious to your guests, but the guests should show some respect for the way things are done around wherever you are. At least, I'm sure that's what the pies were thinking, which makes Applejack's behavior come off as insensitive. So to that end, I could see why the pies weren't as willing to budge for most of the episode. But also the ending isn't about Applejack rejecting her traditions wholesale. Rather, she realizes that the best way forward is for both parties to learn each other's traditions so that they can create new ones together. And while it's not much, we do see the pies implement some of the apple traditions at the end. They don't hide their presence for one, and the parents even learn some countryisms. So, while not perfect, I think the episode is able to tell a halfway decent message. But aside from that, I just had fun watching this episode. I mean, there's Applejack and Pinky. Seeing the two of them try to make this thing work is very nice to see. I also like Apple Bloom and how she really gets into the Pie family spirit and how she really grows to like Maud over the course of the episode. And of course, there we get to meet the rest of the Pie family as well. I mean, like Maud Pie, of course, is great. I mean, Limestone is pretty good to see. Like Marble has her moments. So there are definitely plenty of good things about this episode that make it enjoyable for me. But I feel like the other four just have more to offer in general. So for that reason, I put it here at number five. Now we're Moving on to number 4, and I actually considered putting this episode lower. Like on my initial list, I believe it was around number 7, but obviously after some rearranging and stuff, I have it here at number 4. So at number 4, we have Luna Eclipsed. Now, from this point on the list, I feel like these episodes are ones I genuinely enjoy pretty well. I mean, of course, I think Luna Eclipse is the least strong of that group, but it's still an episode that I get some enjoyment out of. Now, obviously, the main attraction to this episode is Princess Luna, who really tries to get in the spirit of things, only to be caught up in the past. While it had been a whole season since we saw her get reformed, it makes a little sense why she'd pick now to show herself, as this holiday is dedicated to her, to an extent. But it's cool seeing her go around trying to be around others without scaring them. The scene where she learns to stop using her royal Canterlot voice and starts speaking normally is a pretty impactful scene. There's also the part where she starts having fun by playing games. Really, Luna is what makes this episode for me, and seeing her slowly acclimate to modern society is pretty nice to see. And there's a scene where everyone's terrified of her, and in the chaos, she turns the spider dolls into real spiders and plays the game so that she can create fun. I mean, the nervous look on her face is pretty good, in my opinion. That was a great little moment right there. And of course, there's her lashing out, canceling Nightmare Night, only to learn to loosen up by the end. Now, where I think this episode flounders a bit, it has to do with Pinky. Now, it's weird for me to say this. I mean, Pinky is my favorite character. Like, even though I feel like on these rankings so far, I haven't really demonstrated that. I really talked about her more as a problem in episodes, but she is the main source of conflict in this episode. And while it's explained afterwards that she was only being scared to get into the spirit, it's hard to watch when her lack of awareness over how her playing it up is causing more harm than good. I get that the whole message is that Luna should lighten up and have some fun, but when Pinky isn't explaining what she's doing and making it harder for Luna to lighten up, I do have to knock the episode a bit for that. But on the whole, this episode is pretty good. I mean, Halloween is my favorite holiday in my opinion, but it's a fun watch anyway. I mean, Luna is a great character throughout, and I think this is a fun watch on the whole, so I have it here at number 4. Now we're moving on to number 3, and I've already talked about this episode in my musical episode ranking, so I'll try not to go on too long here. But at number 3, we have a Hearthwarming Tale, and again, it's a pretty solid musical episode. I mean, all the songs are great, with Pinky's present and Luna's future being my favorite. I mean, it's interesting seeing the different characters on the show play these parts in the Christmas Carol story. You have Starlight being Scrooge, you have Rainbow being Bob Cratchit, you have Pinky being the ghost of Christmas present, like, and so on and so forth. Like, it's all very interesting to see. And it's of course also interesting how Equestria has its sort of Christmas Carol equivalent story in universe. Now, again, the main problem with this episode is that it kind of leans into the you have to like Christmas or else, that type of territory where Twilight pretty much sits Starlight down and pretty much convinces her to start celebrating the holiday, even though Starlight doesn't really care much for it. Like, I can kind of go two ways on it. Like, on one hand, you could say that Starlight is still Twilight's student, and Twilight doesn't really trust that Starlight can just do things her way, or her own way, that I should say. But, considering that No Second Prances happened a lot too long before that, like, it kind of clashes with that a bit, and it's all kind of a weird situation on the whole. But, like, aside from that, like, the actual Christmas Carol part of it is pretty good. Like, I really enjoyed a lot of it, but I feel like the top two episodes just have more to offer, in my opinion. So I had to leave it here at number 3. Now we're moving on to number 2, and we have one Christmas episode and one Halloween episode left to talk about. And it's just a matter of the order at this point. And I did some thinking, I did some consideration, and at this point, I decided to put the Hearthwarming Club at number 2. Now, this is a pretty solid episode in my eyes. Now, my one main gripe with this episode is Twilight and how she decides to punish all the students unless the perpetrator comes clean. That was a bit harsh on Twilight's end, especially over something as minor as making a mess, and I feel like it encouraged the Creature Six to throw each other under the bus. Twilight should have realized that the offense wasn't that bad, certainly not bad enough to deprive these students of seeing their families, and that this guilty until proven innocent presumption is more likely to bring out the worst in our students than motivate them to do the right thing. And I would say this issue is bigger than that of the number one episode, which is a big reason why I have it here in number two. But aside from that, this is a solid episode as each of the Creature Six get to talk about their unique cultures and what going home for the holiday means for them. It's good world building and fits in with the later season's goal of fleshing out the other species' cultures in a more positive light. There were plenty of charming moments, like when Yona talks about how Snildar Fest is only mostly about smashing, or how Sandbar's life is so boring that his scariest story is about how his heartwarming doll could have gone into the fire. But obviously, the main highlight of the episode is Gallus, who pulled the prank just so he wouldn't be alone for the holiday. It's strange because while this episode shows other cultures in a positive light for the most part, Griffin society is still shown as pretty dysfunctional and unhappy, despite Gilda's efforts to change it. But I really like how they handled Gallus in this episode, with him spending a decent chunk of the episode trying to keep his cool as his friends start turning on each other. And while the foreshadowing is more noticeable in the rewatch, I feel like it's concealed a bit better than a lot of other episodes. The first time I watched this episode, I actually thought there was a chance that none of them did it, or that it was Cozy Glow. Imagine the episode that would have been. But in any case, Gallus being the one to do it also worked, and the scene where he finally breaks down and tells everyone to stop fighting was pretty well done. And of course, there's the ending where all of them decide to stay behind so that Gallus won't be alone for the holidays. It was a nice ending, even if it means none of the others will get to celebrate their unique holidays. So, on the whole, I feel like this was a pretty strong episode. Like, I really think it's a highlight episode for the Creature Six, and really makes me like them more on the watching the season. But considering that one big issue of how Twilight pretty much forced them into this situation and pretty much brought upon this conflict when she should have realized by this point that like forcing them all to stay unless someone comes clean would only cause someone to be pressured into confessing. So I feel like that is enough to keep it out of the number one spot. But I really do enjoy this episode. Now we're moving on to number one, and as I mentioned a bit earlier in the video, I didn't expect this one to be number one when I first put this list together. Then I just started thinking about it more and more, and considering the field of episodes we have, I mean, it kind of fits. So at number one, we have The Scare Master. Now, this is a pretty unique holiday episode in terms of its message. In a follow up to Luna of Eclipsed, we see that Fluttershy still doesn't like Nightmare Night, and this episode is about her trying to get into the spirit. One thing I really like about this episode is how, even when trying to get into the spirit, Fluttershy wants to be herself. She chooses a very basic costume and goes about it her own way, only for her to feel like she's making it less fun for her friends. And it's through that thought that leads her to get more into the spirit. Not because it's what she enjoys, but because she thinks it'll make her friends happy. We see her try to scare friends through the tea party, and it's kind of charming seeing her grinning during all this, as if she thinks it's actually scaring them. It's only when she asks Angel and the other animals for help that she's able to pull off a stunt that truly scares them. Now, the episode is pretty fun throughout, and while I don't particularly care for Halloween based stuff, I could at least relate to Fluttershy trying to get into the spirit and make her friends happy. But then we get to the ending, which really makes this episode jump out. So Fluttershy is finally able to scare her friends, which makes her feel very guilty. And while her friends assure her that being scared is just part of the fun, Fluttershy opens up and admits that she doesn't find it fun. Through that, the episode becomes about how you don't have to do things you don't want to, even if it's something your friends enjoy a lot. Now, some people may compare this to the super speedy Cider Squeezy 6000, which ends with Applejack saying, I didn't learn anything. But I think this is a little different. While Fluttershy ended up feeling the same about Nightmare Night as she felt at the start, the main difference here is that the episode was about her at least trying to give it a chance, to make herself enjoy it the same way her friends do, to come away from the experience with a different understanding than what she had before. And it's only through seeing First Hoof what Nightmare Night is about that she realizes that's not different from what she thought at all. the main lesson she learns is that it's okay if not every experience is life changing, and that it's okay to be true to herself. In turn, her friends can be content knowing that Fluttershy at least tried to find joy in it, and that she now knows what it can, or in this case, can't give her. Like I'm kind of reminded a bit of like Dragon Quest, where Fluttershy was coerced into the dragon migration, like that sort of event. And Twilight said that she didn't want Fluttershy to miss out, only for Fluttershy to back out without giving it a chance. Now, here we can see that her friends were probably worried about her possibly missing out, and Fluttershy gave it a chance to see if she was missing out on anything. And in the end, she wasn't. And that was very empowering to see. And as someone that doesn't like Halloween myself, I find that message pretty empowering and a change of pace from most other episodes. It feels great. So I feel like, again, it's not just because of the message. I mean, the episode itself is pretty fun throughout. I mean, there aren't any major issues I have with it. It's a pretty fun ride throughout, but it's that in addition to the good message that it has at the end and pretty interesting message that makes me consider it the best of these holiday themed episodes. So I have to put it here at number one. And there we go. That'll do it for this video. Now, I have more videos like this planned in the future, talking more MLP. I have more lists coming out in the future. I also have more coverage of Survivor 41 coming out soon if you like that. And I have more fun videos in general in the future. So if you like this content here, feel free to subscribe or watch other videos or do whatever it is you like to do. But for now, that is the video. See ya.